Today we're gonna look at Theoden and how to become overpowered. We're gonna be looking at his skills, his items, his army, and some matchups. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. This is my Theoden. He's currently standing at respect 7, but we're gonna look at this from a respect 5 point of view, and then I'll do some skill builds for respect 3 and respect 1 as well. First of all, Theoden is leader. So that means he gets an extra 5 command. So for example, mine is at level 50, so instead of having 75 command as per usual, he has 80. Besides that, his main attribute would be speed. He scales with might as well, even though his might gain is lower than his focus gain and he doesn't have a good might gain overall. The increased damage dealt by the army is really good on cavalry. Now, if you have Theoden at respect 1, he is okay, but he is not overpowered. In order for him to be actually really strong, he needs to get up to respect 5. If you get to respect 3, then you would go first in Rohirrim and then in Everett leader. If it's the beginning of the game, and you're looking to take titles with him, for example, you start with Rohan or anything like that, and he's the commander that you would use to start the game, then go in Everett leader first, as you would need the sustain. Besides that, after you finish with Everett leader, go in Rohirrim and then go in riding excellence. After you finish with them, go with mounted combat. The other ones are not particularly great, but then go into the renewed as the last one, as it gives a chance of removing a debuff for both himself and his units, but only after you finish with those. When you get to respect 5, that's the moment when Theoden becomes absolutely overpowered, because he gets Horsemaster. Now, Horsemaster gives attack to mounted units, so any mounted units, not only men, not only elves, so any sort of mounted units that you would use on him would get plus 15 attack at max level. And once it reaches max level, it also gives them HP plus 5, so it makes them at the same time more sustainable, and at the same time it gives them a lot of damage. Besides that, it has skill that reduces the enemy's defense by 35, and that's for all enemy units throughout the whole game. So overall, your mounted units will deal more damage because they deal physical damage, so the lower the defense of the enemy, the more damage your units do. So overall, if you have him at respect 5, Horsemaster is the absolute most important one. You can go into Chaotic Retreat afterwards, Everett leader, Rohirrim, and then Riding Excellence in order to reduce the damage that the mounted units receive. Now, for level 50 Theoden, mine is as respect 7. We're gonna calculate at respect 5, and with imparted wisdom up to level 4, it means you would have 15 points for Horsemaster, 7 points for Chaotic Retreat, 15 points for Everett leader, and then 15 points for Rohirrim with an adjunct 7 points in Riding Excellence. Once you get past that point, the two choices I would usually suggest are mounted combat. Besides that, what I would use is Vow of Protection, because it gives speed to your commander and it also gains initiative for him. In terms of items, I'm gonna say a couple of items for each of the slots, starting with the weapon. Now, this depends on what you have, but at the end of the day, the most important stats are might and speed and things that are affecting your mounted units. In terms of the weapons, the best one is the Cutlass. It offers might, it offers speed, and it offers attack to your melee units. So let's look at the modifiers. So it has might, so the commander performs a normal attack, 35% chance of dealing an additional 17.3 focus damage. So that's at level 1. It increases up to 104 focus damage. Now, Theoden doesn't use focus, so this is not good on him. First 4 rounds with Flay, the commander physical damage ignores 30% of target's defense, which is good on some commanders, for example might commanders like Dwalin, like Legolas, but on Theoden specifically it's not good because he barely does damage. And then we have one that's focused on pirates, which Theoden wouldn't be using. So the best one is Melee Might, which increases the damage dealt of melee units by 9%. In case you don't have the Cutlass, what I would suggest as blue item, if you're at the beginning, it's the Ranger's Dagger. It gives might plus 20, speed plus 15, and it also has a melee might that increases the damage dealt by 1.5%. In terms of the golden item that would be best as a weapon for him is the Reach of Riddermark. The modifier for it would be the one that I'm currently holding. It's the Might of Cavalry. So allied mounted units damage dealt plus 2% at the beginning, resulting in 12% at max refinement. This one has might, speed, and speed for mounted units. So overall, it's the best item that you can get for Theoden, and the one that I would suggest. But if you, for example, have a Reach of the Riddermark and a Cutlass, and the Cutlass is at 2 stars, 3 stars, or so on, it's more viable than a Reach of Riddermark at 0 stars, because the stats are a lot better until you actually strengthen and refine the Reach of the Riddermark. In terms of the armor, the one that I would suggest, it's the Scout's Mail. It's a really good item. Overall, it offers might, it offers speed, and it also has a modifier that increases speed by 3 at base level, and it increases it to a total of 18 speed at max refinement. This is really good. The Scout's Mail has another good modifier, and that would be Shroud, that gives free allied units 60% chance to evade the first instance of damage, but it's not as good as the speed. In terms of other items that I would suggest for Theoden, the golden one would be the Ranger's Shroud. It offers might, it offers speed, and it offers stacked range. Now, in terms of the modifier, in my opinion, in order to make him as flexible as possible, the one that I would go for is resistance. So burn, poison, and focus damage receive minus 30%. Now, strength from dexterity, this is a really good one. This is the one that I'm personally torn in between with resistance, but when you're looking at mounted units, they usually have high defense and moderate damage depending on which unit you'd use, but at the same time they'd be really weak against like burn, focus, or poison damage. So something like Galadriel, something like Witch King would be doing really good against him. So the might overall, it's absolutely amazing, him being able to get extra might and everything like that, and the fact that it's modified by the speed stat, it actually increases it a lot. So I'm expecting that 12 might will be at least 24 might actually that's added during combat. But at the same time, if your units are tankier and get 30% less damage from the things that actually kill them most of the time, I would rather have that. In terms of the accessory, now me personally, I'm using the Lothlorien belt, which is, in my opinion, the ideal golden accessory for Theoden, because it gives speed a lot. The focus doesn't interest us as much, but the speed to range as well is really good. And if we're looking at the modifiers, the one that in my opinion stands out is the Iron Guard. So if, for example, you're getting a Lothlorien belt with Iron Guard that gives 36% HP recovery for your melee units, it makes them so much more sustainable, especially with the skill set that Theoden has. Recovering HP for his mounted units each round. Imagine they recover an extra 36% HP. That makes them a lot more tankier. Besides that, in terms of a purple item, what I would suggest is the hit lane. The hit lane is an amazing item overall. You can use it on multiple commanders. It has some solid might, it has some focus, but besides that, it has army HP, and it also has a recovery stat for the modifier, so it has mend. That meaning that every 2 rounds, one allied unit recovers 20% HP. At minimum level, at maximum level, they recover 120% HP. So that means that your units overall would be more sustainable, and that means that you're gonna have a lot less losses at the end of the report, which is really good. In terms of the helm, the Horseman's helm gives might and speed, which is absolutely amazing, and it also gives defense to mounted units, which is ideal for Theoden. In terms of the modifier, now there's actually 3 good modifiers on this one. The light cavalry one is the one that you wouldn't be using. In terms of the other 3 though, so resolve first 3 rounds, all that is 100% chance to get madness immunity each round. So this is absolutely amazing if you're fighting against evil side. Wording first 2 rounds, all that is 100% chance to gain stun immunity each round. Again, really good. But at the same time, mounted vigor, which gives damage received for your allied mounted units -6%. All 3 of them are really valid choices for Theoden, but it depends on what side you're fighting and everything like that. Me personally, I went for something that's more generic, so I went for the mounted vigor. There is one helm that me personally I would suggest, and it's this one. So if you get lucky and you get Aegis on the Cask of the Submerged Isle, it has might, it has focus, and it has speed. We don't care about the focus, we care about the might and the speed. But besides that, the modifier is the best modifier in the whole game. It has first 4 rounds, all allies 33.3% chance to gain stun and madness immunity each round. Now this is at 1-star refined, so let's look at them. For maximum, it has an 100% chance to gain stun and madness immunity each round. At the beginning, it's not that great. I'm gonna be realistic with you, 16.7 chance to gain stun and madness immunity each round. Realistically, if you only have it at 0 stars, there's a possibility that none of your units would get any immunity for the first 4 rounds. But at the end of the day, once you refine this, once you strengthen and refine this, it is the best helm in the game. There is another one that gives stun and madness immunity to your allies for the first 4 rounds, and that would be the Hunter's Guide. And this doesn't have speed, that's why I would prefer the Cask more, but at the same time it has attack to ranged, which is really good. So depending on which one you have, if you have the Hunter's Guide that gives both stun and madness immunity, it's still an awesome helm to have, even though it doesn't give speed. Let's look at what units would be good on Theoden. Now my Theoden is currently in the field. This is the formation that I'm currently using because I am fighting Linden, so I'm fighting the good side. What I'm expecting from this, I'm expecting that I won't find that much focus damage. When you're fighting the evil side, there's a lot more focus damage commander, there's a lot more poison damage, there's a lot more burn damage at the end of the day, especially burn damage. Now, since we don't have those as much, we don't need something that does good against, for example, burn damage or focus damage or anything like that. So that's why I'm using this specific build. If it was against evil, I would use a different build. Now let's go through it for a bit. So we have marshals, which are the tier 4 for Rohan. If I wouldn't have marshals, I would use cavaliers. But because I have a better version of cavaliers, I'm using them. If you're not playing as Rohan and you don't have marshals, use cavaliers in order for them to be one of the main damage dealers that you have. If you look at cavalier, they are doing more damage by 56%, and the effect is modified by the speed stat. Its effect diminishes by 1/3 with each damage dealt. So what that means, it means that they're absolutely perfect for Theoden, because Theoden is a commander that scales with speed. He has some specific gear that gives speed to your units, and at the same time his skills are tailored to actually help mounted units a lot. So marshals are absolutely great on him. But they're doing a lot of damage, they're not tanking a lot. Even though they're quite tanky with them being mounted units, receiving less damage and everything like that, you need some actual tanks in there. So the unit that would be tanking for you would be the Cataphract. Now the Cataphract are mounted units, so they have -10 damage received, but on top of that, the damage received from enemy melee units is reduced by 15. Now, if you're looking at them, their damage, HP, and defense are all increased a lot, including their speed as well. So what that means, it means that they're gonna be tanking a lot more for your units to be able to do damage. So for your marshals and then for your bow knights. Now, bow knights are not the best against good factions. I chose to use some bow knights as well. If I wouldn't be using bow knights, I would use some Bree riders or some Rem riders in order to be able to deal more damage to the enemy units. But if you decide to use bow knights, this is the one way that I would use them with cataphracts and marshals, and them as the backline that deals more damage. Because if we're looking at the bow knights, they're dealing about 51 to 57 damage with Theoden and the other gear he has now. If you wouldn't want to use this specific build against good factions, so if you wouldn't want to use bow knights, then I would suggest use cataphracts with marshals or cavaliers, and then the last one would be Rem riders if you cannot get a hold of Bree riders, for example. Why Rem riders? Because if you're looking at Rem riders, they would decrease the enemy defenses. So the defense of the enemies is reduced by at level 10, the enemy unit's defense is decreased by 50% on head for 1 round. On top of that, they have mounted, which means that the damage received is decreased by 10%, and they're overall a quite tanky unit. They're not dealing that much damage, but they are there to decrease the enemy's defense and to be able to tank damage. Now, this is the build I would use for we just talked about something. So this is the build that I would use against good factions. One thing that I would say regarding the cataphracts, if you're playing as Gondor and you have Swan Knights, then you can replace cataphracts with Swan Knights and have Cavaliers plus Swan Knights, and then plus Bow Knights or Ram Riders. Fighting Evil though, this changes quite a lot. So the two builds that I would use personally fighting Evil, it's either Bow Knight in order to have something against large units, so trolls, Mumakil and so on, and then marshals in order to be able to deal more damage, and then Rem Riders, because Rem Riders would be the ones that would be good against burn damage. If you're fighting the evil side, you would find a lot of alchemists. Alchemists deal a lot of damage to a lot of burn damage. So the best units that you can actually use in terms of mounted units would be the Ram Riders, because they have at max level burn damage received reduced by 20%. So Ram Riders would be the most important in the build. Besides Ram Riders, Bow Knights are good because they have damage against large units increased by 50%, so this would be two of the main ones that you would use. Now, if you are in Rohan, I would use Marshals. If you are in Gondor, I would use Swan Knights. If you are in a non-role playing server and you're playing as Angmar, I would use their tier 4 units. But besides that, if you don't have any of those, I would suggest either using Bree Riders or Cataphracts. So this is the way I would go when I'm making my build. We have Ram Riders that definitely need to be there, Bow Knights that definitely need to be there, and then we need to, as a third unit, have either Cataphracts, either one of our tier 4 units, or Bree Riders. The only thing that I want to look now is how Theoden would deal a bit against different commanders. Now, I'm not fighting any evil factions at the moment. I'm fighting Linden, actually. So to give you a bit of a look at the reports, that we have this not by Theoden. This is the one that was on the actual tile. This unfortunately is my Gil-galad that got slapped by a Galadriel. But let's look a bit at Theoden. Now, this is a fight between Theoden at level 50 and the level 48 Haldir. The gear is not the best on Haldir, it's pretty good, but my Theoden has better gear, so bear that in mind. He is, though, fighting as Linden, so he has tier 4 Noldor Longshot, which are good on Haldir. Not the best tier 4 unit, but on something like Haldir or Gil-galad are good. There are some modifications that I would make to the army and to the build, but overall it's pretty good build and a pretty good army. If we're looking at the report, Theoden didn't do that much damage. He only did 21,000 damage. The same for Haldir, he did about 33,000 damage. The most of the damage for both of those commanders in this situation would come from the units. Now, if you look at Theoden, actually his units dealt 245,000, while Haldir only did 109,000. So overall, Theoden, yes, he doesn't do that much damage as a commander, but his units deal insane amounts of damage, and he also does a certain amount of healing for his units. That's really good. So overall, we're looking at 655 units that are dead for our Theoden, 3,150 that are dead for Haldir. So overall, we're doing really good on this type of matchup. Against Gandalf, this was the next fight. So Theoden wasn't at full army. It was a draw. I let the draw go all out to see who would win, and we actually won, even though they had Guard of the Tower, which is really good against mounted units. Now, what happened here with Gandalf? If we're looking again, the damage came from the army, 168,000 compared to 117 of Gandalf, 17,000 commander damage. Gandalf did twice more, and we actually had more healing than Gandalf. So this is really good. Overall, they did more we did more damage than them, but at the same time, we have a couple of levels ahead, and our gear is a bit better. So that in a way evens out with the fact that Gandalf almost had full army, and we were missing about 22-23 command from Theoden. From the previous fight with Haldir, and even in this situation, we're looking at the draw going on. It's in our favor here. it's actually in our favor here, and overall we managed to win, even though we lost quite a lot of units. Normally I wouldn't let the draw go out. I would just call back, reinforce, and then send again, but I wanted to see what happens against the Gandalf. Now, there was another fight that we previously had. This happened today as well. It was a fight against Legolas. Level 50 Theoden, level 49 Legolas. And this is a Legolas that has some really strong gear, uses a good army. I feel like the combination between Guardians that are really tanky with Guard of the Tower that's good against mounted units, and the Ram Rider that would decrease the defense of my army. It's the best army that he could have in this situation. He doesn't need an older or long shot or anything like that. And if we're looking at the report, Theoden only did 25,000 damage. Legolas did 181,000 because he's a commander that focuses more on his damage. Now, when we're looking at the army, he's only did about 55,000. Ours did 272,000 damage. So overall, we received 236. They received 297, but they only had 7,000 healing. I presume that's because of a hit lane. Oh no, it's because of the harp that has sustain as well. And we actually did 52,000. So there's a lot of units that instead of dying went and actually got healed. And if we're looking at it, they lost 3,462 units. We lost 1,207. So these are the reports that I have. I don't have any at the moment that are on the evil side. But what I would suggest realistically, if you're going against evil side commanders, the two that I would strongly recommend to avoid are Witch King, because he's using alchemists, a lot of them, and the burn damage received is ridiculous. Even though you're taking all the precautions, realistically, if you have the Ranger Shroud with the minus burn damage, and then on top of that you're using Ram Riders, yes, it decreases it, but overall the best case scenario is for you to have a draw. You're not gonna be stomping them. I'm looking at Theoden as a commander that would stomp enemies effectively. So I'm giving you I'm telling you the best matchups possible in order for you to be able to do that. So there's no point for Theoden to go against the Witch King when he would get destroyed, or he would, best case scenario, be able to have a draw. Send the Gandalf the Grey, send the Gil-galad, send the Galadriel, send anything that has White Council and would be dealing with Witch King. Besides that, I wouldn't send Theoden against someone as Sauron. The best case scenario is to have a draw, unless you get to a point where you have the cask at max refinement and you can say, okay, there is no possibility for me to get stunned, there is no possibility for me to gain madness, to be affected by madness, so then I can fight Sauron as well. So if you get that, if you get to a certain point in which you can say confidently, madness doesn't affect me, stun doesn't affect me, then you can fight Sauron as well. Otherwise, I would suggest to just stay back and focus on the commanders that you can fight against. Besides that, the last commander that I wanted to look at that would absolutely, but absolutely destroy Theoden on the evil side, and that's Khaldun. He's really good against mounted units. His units that he is using specifically are really good against mounted units. So me personally, what I would suggest is, as Theoden, against evil side commanders, don't go for Witch Kings, don't go for Saurons, and don't go for Khalduns no matter what. For good side commanders, what I would suggest to avoid, there are two big commanders that I would suggest to avoid between the tier 3s, and that would be Galadriel and Dane. Why Galadriel? Because she deals a lot of focus damage, and mounted units don't have anything that deals with focus damage. They have really high defense, so they deal well with physical damage, but against focus damage they're absolutely destroyed. And besides that, Dane, because even though he is a physical damage commander, he has a skill. So heavily wounded against one enemy target, deals 7% physical damage, cannot recover HP for 2 rounds, which is a thing that's really important in Theoden's kit. So not being able to heal them for a couple of rounds actually affects his units a lot. At tier 2s, the same as Dane, Gimli has a skill through which he is able to stop the enemies from recovering HP. So against one enemy target, deals 70% physical damage, and they cannot recover HP for 2 rounds. The same thing as Dane. I wouldn't suggest going against Gimli with Theoden either. If we're looking at anybody else in tier 2 besides Gimli, he's more than capable to beat them. If we're looking at a lot of tier 3s, he's able to beat them. If we're looking at any tier 1s, he's able to beat them. So Theoden overall is a really good commander that can stomp in a lot of situations. But what I would suggest, take a scout, send a scout there. If you don't see Dane, Gimli or Galadriel, go for it. If you don't see Sauron, Witch King or Khaldun, go for it. And you're gonna see how good he does against a lot of other commanders.